My name is Melissa. I am the manager of governance and elections here at the USC. So this has been my baby for the last month or so, getting these sessions set up. So I'm really, really happy that you're all here. I was saying to the folks who kind of came in a little bit early that I was genuinely concerned that it would just be like the panelists talking to each other. So this is amazing and makes me extremely happy. Just want to make, okay, so that's good. Whether you are watching this, as I said, we're also recording it. So if you are watching the recording later, I'm really, really, again, happy that you're here. I just want to start off by talking a little bit about what it means to be here. So I'm a settler in London, Ontario. I know we're probably all coming from different places right now because that is the nature of this year and Zoom calls. But for me, that means I'm here on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and Attawandaron peoples. So on a map, what you would see is the Oneida Nation of the Thames, the Chippewa Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. And that map, like all maps of Canada, reflects an ongoing process of colonization and displacement. If you're here with me in London and you're a settler like myself, or wherever you are in this country, I just want to highlight a couple of current events, just some things to keep in mind, because I am a big fan and a big believer that land acknowledgements shouldn't just be about listing off territories. They should be a bit of a call to action and a bit of a reflection of where we are right now, because this is not a historical process. This is an ongoing one. So there's a court case that started in Kamloops this morning around Indigenous land defenders and resistance to the TMX pipeline. Pay attention for the upcoming sentencing in the death of Barbara Kentner in Thunder Bay, the ongoing events at 1492 Laidback Lane in Haldimand in Caledonia area. There was an outbreak declared in Nunavut this morning of COVID-19, which is going to be really exacerbated because 50% of the households in Nunavut are overcrowded, which is going to make it difficult for people to isolate. Think about places like Niskantaga First Nation, where they've had boil water advisories for the last 25 years. They're doing a lot of active advocacy around that particular community right now. And what I want to highlight is that each of these things are the result of political decisions and policy decisions. And we're all obviously here because we are interested in policy and politics. So as we kind of go forward, and as you go forward, I think the call to action here is really how we build relationships in spaces and political spaces where we are both leaders, but also in such a, like, at the same time, we're not necessarily the people who need to be leading in these scenarios. We need to be figuring out how to be good supporters, good. There was a podcast last week that I listened to, being really good interns as sellers. Like, we should be running, the idea was that we run and get coffee and do the admin stuff that makes it easier for people to be active and work in their own communities. And I think it's a really difficult balance. It's not just around relationships with Indigenous folks, it's across a broad range of issues and communities and relationships. And I think it's something that's really crucial for any leader to figure out, but especially if you're stepping into a political space, which I'm assuming that if you're not already, you're at least thinking about it because you're here today. And with that in mind, I want to go ahead and get started with our panel, because I know we've got some timelines and some scheduling here, so I want to get going. I'm not going to do super long introductions because I think everyone is going to be more interested in hearing from the panelists than you are from me. So we have today Dan Walton, who's the Vice President of Crestview Strategy. We have Matt Reeser, who's the President of the USC. Victoria Barroso is our Vice President, University Affairs. And Mac just joined the call. She is our Vice President, External Affairs. How this is going to work: we're going to have everyone on the panel have a chance to speak a little bit about their experiences, what they've learned, what they've done, what their campaign strategies are like. We're really trying to answer the question for you today is like, okay, so you were interested in running, where do you start? Because that's one of the things that comes up from folks when I kind of talk to them. They're like, yeah, I want to, but I don't really know what to do. So we're trying to kind of get some of that uncertainty out of the way here. Once everyone has had a chance to speak, we'll do a bit of a Q&A. If you are nervous about asking questions, you can either message me in the chat, or Nick and I have developed quite the list of questions that we can get things kicked off with. but we will start with Dan, and we can go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. My name is Dan Walton. I am 1,000 years old and was involved in the USC like a decade ago. So I have the least relevant experience, I'm sure, to the subject of this this discussion in terms of what things are actually like on the ground right now. But I think I was asked because I was the campaign manager for a successful candidate when I was involved in the USC. And to give you a sense of how long ago that was the first time a viral video was ever used, a campaign video was ever used for a winning presidential candidate whose name is Emily Rowe. And so we, you know, we have a bit, I have a bit of an experience to share there and can talk about my experiences running a campaign. I was also vice president of the USC for that successful campaign and president of USA. So happy to talk about those experiences. I think Nick and Melissa also asked me to join in because I still work in politics. I work at a firm called Crestview Strategy. We advise clients across the country on a range of priorities when it comes to government relations and public affairs. But a big part of that is campaigns. And we run a wide breadth of digital campaign strategies to help mobilize supporters towards a desired outcome. And so that's a big part of my day-to-day work. I was also a candidate in the 2014 provincial election for the Ontario Liberal Party. I was sent to my hometown in Woodstock, Ontario, in the riding of Oxford County to run as a Liberal candidate, probably the least likely riding in all of Ontario for a Liberal to ever be elected. So the odds were long, and it was a really fun experience. And so happy to share some lessons learned from that as well.
Thanks, Dan. Why don't we go to Matt next?
Yeah, I guess a bit of I'll be brief because Dan has a very extensive background in all this for many of his years of work. I guess mainly where I want to be here is, and in this group is being someone who ran last year, faced a lot of the challenges, faced a lot of the ups and the downs of both of it. So the main thing that with the USC running an event like this is just to make sure that we're able to provide any sort of support, knowledge, anything possible to make this as fair and as accessible as an election as we can possibly do. Last year, I felt like there were things that I just like wish that I knew or wish that people that were running as well could have known, and that there's no relationship thing that would advantage or disadvantage someone more than the other. So I guess we're really wanting this to be an opportunity for you all to get on the same page of each other. But I'm really to share any sort of stories and experiences, and obviously, and also hear Dan speak. So with that, I'll turn it to Victoria. Or Melissa, I'm assuming it's going to Victoria next. Okay, perfect. I just didn't want to take that away.
Awesome. I'll probably talk for like a minute-ish. So in my last 4 years on campus, I've run in 6 elections. 4 of them were at large, but I can kind of explain kind of my trajectory throughout university to where I am now. When I entered Western, I was a first year in the Faculty of Science, and I ran against around 100 other first-year students for a first-year rep position. I only say that it's very different than, I guess, running at large for the USC. But I say that because I don't know what, you're here for and what kind of position you're interested in. But I would hope that, this session or this series could be applicable to you in any capacity of election. So I did run internally within a faculty council for kind of a department representative or first year representative position. And then at the end of my first year, I ran to be a USC counselor of the Faculty of Science. And I ran for re-election in that role as well. So I did that one twice. And then in the end of my third year, I ran to be the president of the Faculty of Sciences Student Council. So that was an at-large election for the USC. And then at the end of my fourth year, I ran for USC president against Matt. So that was a big election as well. I was the first woman in at least 4 years to run for that role, probably more. So that's also just kind of a fun piece of information and some context to what that election kind of felt like from my perspective. And then I also, after that election, ended up running internally within the USC for the VPUA role, which I'm currently in now, which was elected internally by council. So I have a bit of elections experience, both at large as well as internally in both a faculty council and a USC setting. But then I've also run in a number of other kind of lower level, just like elected positions, whether it be, for things like being an USA delegate or, being on different committees within faculty councils or the USC. And I've also lost in a lot of elections. So I'm just going to put that out there as well. I think for USA, I ran every semester from my first year until my third year to try and be a delegate. I didn't get it until my third year. So I only say that because it's really important that you're here. But I think it's also important when we talk about elections to have candid conversations around, what it feels like to win and what it feels like to lose and how you can bounce back from those things and still be involved and still have meaningful experiences and kind of work your way around the political spectrum at Western throughout your time here, whether that be, in your first year or even if you're in your last year. So happy to answer any questions and happy to be here. Mac, I think it's going to you next.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think I was originally planned to speak here, but I wanted to attend and now I'm here. My name is Mackenzie. I am the Vice President of External Affairs at Western. I use she, her pronouns. I also have my fair share of election experience, having run Get Out the Vote campaigns for both municipal and federal candidates here in London, Ontario, which was kind of my initial precursor to politics, which were both actually accidents. I got started through a work integrated learning course at King's University, who made me do it for a class. And then it turned out I really liked it. So I also was the one of the campaign managers for an unsuccessful USC election team 2 years ago now. And then last year I ran for vice president of external affairs through Western's University Students Council. So elections are my favorite part of politics. So I love talking about them and would be more than happy to chat now and with any of you if you ever want to talk elections.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Just a note, I'm keeping myself muted because I have 2 dogs that are currently sleeping, but there's no guarantee they'll stay that way. So just give me a minute every time I need to speak. Thank you all for those introductions. And so I think what might make sense if it works for the 4 of you, is it easier if we just start asking you questions? Is that the easiest way for you to do this? Or do you want a chance to speak a little bit more to your experience, examples, that kind of thing?
No, I don't think so. I think it'd be better to get a sense as to like how we can be helpful and like share some perspective. The thing I'm interested to learn is, what positions are people thinking about running for? What questions do they have about what they need to do to prepare that sort of work? How can we be helpful? I do only have until 3:30, unfortunately, Melissa. I'm sorry. So okay. I did book up that last half hour. So yeah, happy to do as much as I can in those that 15 minutes.
Awesome, thanks. So for those of you who are joining us on the call, I think there's 9 people. Do you have any burning questions right now, or do you want Nick and I to turn to our list? And feel free to just unmute yourself and speak. Don't worry about putting your hand up or any of that.
I would just welcome, if there are any questions specifically for Dan, maybe do that first because we can stick around. So I'm happy to I feel like that's probably good if anyone has any questions for Dan, not to put you on the spot.
No, that's why I'm here.
Okay, I'm not seeing anyone unmute, so I'm going to go ahead and maybe break the ice a little bit. So I guess just to kick it off, Matt, you mentioned there were things that you wish you knew, or that you wish someone had told you, or that you wish you had a way of finding out. We're going to everyone can answer this question, but what is one thing you wish you knew before you started your very first campaign?
Many things to answer that
Okay,
in a sideways. Yeah, no, but I will boil it down to one for the purpose of this. I think what I wish I knew was that I guess I'll put it this way, in the sense that there's no one successful way to build a team. That stems into a big kind of conversation that I won't get into right now, but the fact that team building is difficult, I wish I knew how that would feel, because I remember being extremely stressed out with building a campaign team, feeling I was too slow. I didn't know who to have. I didn't know the structure. So that's something I really, I guess, wish that I kind of had more information on how to even start, because that was something where I felt like I decided I was going to run, but then I didn't know where to run to. So I guess that's mine.
Anybody else want to jump in? Same deal, just unmute yourselves.
Yeah, I feel like I was thinking sort of back after we prepped for this on Friday, Melissa, on like what I see as like the biggest challenges in running a campaign, and what's different this year. And I think I would say one of the things that I was most surprised about was just how many bodies you needed, right? Like I think that was similar to what Matt was saying about building a team. Typically you'd have like a booth, and you'd have to have that staffed like all day, every day of a very long campaign. And the amount of people that you need to sign up and give their time in particular for the cause, it requires a huge number of people, right? And I think adapting in the climate that we find ourselves in now, where a lot of campaigning is going to be done virtually, I think the same problem arises in that you have to have people to help execute on contact, right? Like you can do digital advertising and all of the kind of social media engagement advertising that is going to be an important element of a campaign you're going to run. But you're also going to need people to do outreach, right? You're going to need individual engagement and personalized engagement as part of a campaign this year. And it's going to require a lot of bodies. And so in terms of, what are the biggest challenges, or what didn't I expect? I would say the sheer number of people you need to have involved in a campaign. And I think that the more time that you put in early on in investing and securing those people, the easier it gets as time goes on.
Mac or Vic, any thoughts?
The one thing I would add to know before you run an election is that it's okay to be human. And that was one thing that kind of struck me, especially as somebody who spent an entire election season supporting two candidates who were running. Candidates go through a lot, and you really have a time talking to people who get what's going on, because you might see you run and your friends are excited to booth for you, but not everybody knows the kind of things that go on behind the scenes. So getting a good friend that kind of gets what's going on but isn't so involved that you can't tell them everything is a really good thing to have. And that also knowing that you physically cannot do every single thing that every single Instagram DM from your account asks you to do, and that's okay. Knowing your own limits is really, really important, and is honestly a really good exercise in these elections.
Yeah, if I can just kind of chime in at the end, I would say one thing that I thought, it was something I reflected on kind of after the fact in some of my elections, and to the point about having lots of people and having an organized structure. I would say making sure you have lots of people that are there to support you as part of your team, but also that you're giving them kind of specific roles and things to do, because I think a lot of the time you'll assume that things are going to get done, and then things maybe don't get done, or they're not done well enough, and it's because there isn't enough of that planning and organization ahead of time. So you want to make sure that you're really thinking through all the different possible things that you would want to do or could possibly come up during that election period, and preparing as best you can, and having people kind of allocated to to get out the vote or helping you prep for things. I think especially as a candidate, it's important to be able to take a step back from that, and in having your team in specific roles or more directed roles where they can kind of alleviate that burden from you as a candidate. It'll help you focus on being present and talking to students and doing the things that you need to do during the election period, and not feeling super stressed because you have to deal with so many different things. Up until the election, you can very much be involved with your team and help them organize and help them prepare. But once that election starts, you should be pretty hands-off as a candidate, and your team should be really the ones carrying you through and helping and supporting you through the election. And it's okay to feel stressed during the election and to be able to take a step back. And I think that's just something that you need to have a conversation with your team about beforehand and make sure that everyone's kind of prepared for.
Thanks. Mac, you had a question that you wanted to ask Dan before he goes.
Yeah, just a question for Dan, as somebody who has been really involved in the USC and USC elections. I was just wondering how you thought that the skills that you learned running in these elections as a student politician translated into the workforce later, as somebody who may have won or lost elections, what you thought was valuable.
That's a really great question. And I would say that I think the entire experience of being involved in the USC is an amazing learning experience that you can get in university for later parts in life if you're interested in going into politics or interested in working in government. Both of which I have remained and did, and I think a lot of USC alumni end up doing, right? Just because it's a logical sort of trajectory for a lot of people. The elections experience is at Western, I think it's like a microcosm of actual politics, right? Like you're at such a big campus with such a significant student involvement rate and such an enormous amount of responsibility attached to the functions the USC delivers on campus. You end up having a really important election with a lot of attention being placed on, a lot of money being invested in it, and a lot of people hours. To the first answer to the first question we were talking about, just the sheer number of people that are involved and care about it. And so I think the pressure of that all, the media engagement elements of it with the Gazette, the responsibilities to follow certain bylaws and the consequences for not following those bylaws are all very important. Sorry, I'm sure you can hear my dog whining in the background. Hey. Anyway, so yeah, I would say like all of those things are enormously important. Looking back on it, I would say that the experience I had working at the USC on the executive was probably one of the biggest sort of career head starts for me in a lot of ways, and the chance to help lead an organization of the size and scale and full-time staff that are involved is a really unique experience at the age you get to do it, right? Like, I mean, to be able to manage full-time people, to lead an organization like that from a strategic standpoint at such a young age is absolutely unique, and you don't get that anywhere else. And so for me, those were all just like huge head starts for me when I did get involved in work later on in my life. I already had learned a lot of things that you end up having to learn in your first few years of work. You get those experiences in the USC and whatever function you're taking on.
Great, thank you.
I do have a question for you, Dan.
Sure.
How would you deal with, first of all, negative campaigning, just if a candidate were to go that route, as well as, let's say you're having an interaction with a potential voter and they respond poorly to your ideas. How do you handle that conversation in the moment?
That's a really great question, and I think definitely two of the things you don't really prepare for when you're thinking about getting involved in an election is sort of the two fronts there, which is that it gets nasty quickly if it's not handled well, and secondly, voters, whether they be students or citizens, can be awful to you when your name's on a ballot. Let me tell you, like it is shocking, the experience of people feeling entitled to be able to talk to you however they feel like because you're running for something, right? And so those two are unique. I would say when it comes to negative campaigning, you've got to decide early on what kind of campaign you want to run and what you want your campaign to represent. And so, if that's going to be something that's really positive in its orientation, that's going to outline some sort of bold vision for where you want to take the student organization, then you really have to stick to it, right? Because as soon as you start getting negative, and as soon as you start feeling insecure in that vision, you undermine it. And you really shoot yourself in the foot in a lot of ways. And so, I think that, the attraction to going negative, you have to think about the consequences on your own campaign and not just on your opponent, right? Like, how does it define you in your own campaign? But if you want to run a campaign against something, I ran for HUCSC, I guess it would be the Huron Students' Council presidency. And I wouldn't say I ran a negative campaign, but I ran against something. And it was, how I defined my campaign from the outset. I won that election because I was running against something that I knew a lot of students were against and opposed to, and no need to get into it. But like, I think that is, an orientation you can decide early on. If you want to be the positive cheerleader, it's going to be hard to run negative elements to your campaign because it's going to undermine your own narrative. In terms of dealing with, in the profession it's called the angry public, but dealing with voters, it's unique. I think you have to recognize pretty quickly whether or not you can persuade someone to vote for you. So whether it be you're at the door in a municipal or provincial election, or you're at the door in a residence hall for a student council election, you got to decide pretty quickly: is this person persuadable, or have they already made up their mind? And if they've already made up their mind, every moment you spend with them is a wasted moment, right? Like it's like the idea of a political campaign is to persuade people to vote for you. And if people are unpersuadable, then there is no point in wasting your time with them. And so that really ends up, I think, transpiring in the event of, to Nick, to how you describe it, someone saying, I don't agree with you on this and blah, 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 blah. And, they're coming at you, and it's because they've already made up their mind. They don't agree with you. So move to the next door. Thank them for their time. In provincial politics, I'd say I found this a lot more common because people have a lot of preconceived notions about different political parties, particularly when you run somewhere where people are generally made up their mind in one direction, whether that be in downtown urban centers where more progressive politics ends up holding true, or in more rural ridings where conservative politics ends up being more true. The voter thinks that you represent everything about the thing that they're against, right? And so they feel entitled to say whatever they want to you, and it's a unique experience. It took me when I ran for provincial office, it took me a few days to get adjusted to this idea that people were going to like swear at me and tell me that they thought I should be in jail and things like that. When you went into a Tim Hortons, like that's a different experience than your day-to-day life. And so, it takes you a little bit to get used to, and then you just realize, it's part of what you're doing. And then you just say, thanks for your support and move on and try and make them more upset than they already were.
Great. And then
Nick, can I add to that?
Sure, yeah. We're just noting that Dan's leaving shortly.
Oh, then that's fine. No, go ahead. Keep going.
Go.
Are you sure?
I just have one more, and then Victoria, maybe you
so
can jump in and
go
add your
ahead.
comment to this question.
Yeah,
Cool.
I prioritize that.
Cool. Dan, just one final kind of insight before you take off. First of all, thank you for spending the time with this group today. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Dan and I are kind of contemporaries in the student movement. Back in the day, I was about 2 years behind Dan, but we did work together a bit. So thinking from your first campaign, so that first campaign that you worked on that had the viral video that you spoke of, I remember that coming out, to the most recent campaign you worked on. What are some of the things that you reflect now on that maybe you overlooked or you thought were way more important than they actually were?
I would say the intricacies of policy are probably something that you always overestimate the importance of in any campaign that you get involved in. And that's not to say your platform doesn't matter. Like I think having, especially in student politics, I think having a strong platform that grabs the attention of people is very important. But the intricacies of the policy of those ideas or being able to deliver on them. So for example, in the year that I was involved in a student campaign, this just came to my mind, I remember this. One of our signature platform ideas that we were going to put a liquor store in the University Community Center. Or it was a wine rack, actually, I think, because that seemed more conceivable than a liquor store. And so we said we're going to put a wine rack in the UCC. And I don't know if anyone else has promised this since then, but I doubt that it's ever happened. And we got immediate feedback from student senators that were in the Senate or people, the Board of Governor person, that sort of thing, being like, they'll never allow this. Like, you can never do this. And it's like, well, who cares, right? Like, it doesn't matter. We're gonna promise it because we want to grab people's attention, and we're gonna work to make it happen. I'm not saying you should lie and put out like stupid ideas that are totally inconceivable, but you can be bold, and you don't have to be able to say like, here's the intricate policy roadmap for how I'm going to get this done. And I think that the overestimation in campaigns for the importance of policy, or the importance of communications in prose, is way over exaggerated. Every communication or every campaign I've been involved in, you campaign in poetry, right? Like you campaign to try and win over people's support at the highest level with the most number of people. And so I think that I would say that is consistently, no matter what level of student politics or politics you're involved in, whether it be student politics, provincial politics, federal politics, I've been involved in a lot. And I would say that every single time people overestimate how important it is to write really great long form policy.
Thank you very much.
I can make the people I'm going to talk to in 5 minutes wait 5 minutes. So if there's like one last question or another question, I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
I actually have for Dan. It kind of follows up on the question from before. I was wondering, just from your prior experience, how do you think that a candidate going into this can best position themselves to be in a place where they can reach out to the public, the people that they have to support, and have those people come to them and tell them what they really want to hear or really want as support from that position?
So just to make sure I understand your question right, you're sort of saying, how do you build a network of support from across the university for your campaign? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, more or less on that, and then be able to connect to the students in like on a direct basis to hear out their issues and struggles.
Yeah, so I think you have to put a lot of time, right? And it's interesting we're having this conversation in like mid-November, because I think this is probably when we would have started, or approximately when we would have started planning in really serious form the campaign that I was involved in the USC. And I would say you have to do like two things to achieve on what I think are the goals you're talking about. One, you've got to figure out how you're going to map your support and understand the needs of every like function of the campus, right? And I remember spending a lot of time thinking about each of the faculties and each of the residences and sort of all of the subdivisions, the affiliate colleges, all of the subdivisions of Western's community, all of which sort of like ratchet up into the USC, and sort of how do we have the constituency support of all of those different groups? And really that imperative makes you think a lot about, okay, what do they need, right? Like what is different about the science students versus the like faculty of arts students versus the social science students? I don't know if these terms all still mean the same things, but we'll go with them. You know, like, do you understand what those people need and what makes them different and what their different needs are, right? And so I think that sort of drives you to have to answer some of the sort of second questions that you're asking there. And I think that having people from all of those groups involved in your campaign, engaged in the conversation, supporting your efforts really sort of helps you to ladder up into building a bigger movement, right? And I would say that if you're thinking about running, I would say the two things you should start figuring out right now, just to sort of build on your question and move into something that I think everyone wants to hear, which is to say you should start figuring out what your platform is. So, you know, what are the 5 things that you want to put in your platform, like, and hang in the window for people to be interested in your campaign? And secondly, do you map out the support across all of those constituencies at Western, right? So do you have someone from Science Students Council and, you know, Social Sci and Delaware, and I'm straining my memory, MedCid and Huron, and, you know, did you have all of the like different constituencies at Western sort of not locked down? But the faster you can figure that out, the more successful your campaign is going to be, because you want a cross campus network. You want to understand what compels students across those different faculties and groups to come forward and support you. So yeah, I think those are the two things you got to start working on now: platform and network of support.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan.
I can do one more if somebody's got one more question.
I had one more funny one, but a quick one, is if you would be comfortable with us sharing.
I like a funny one.
I was going to say, would you be comfortable with us sharing the YouTube video with you and Emily that garnered over 70,000 views, I believe it is, on YouTube?
Would I be comfortable with you sharing? I mean, yeah, it's still up there. We're still pretty proud of that, actually.
Perfect. I just didn't want to embarrass you in this group with, but we found the video. And it's incredible.
I always forget that I'm in it in those opening scenes, and yeah, I probably look a lot different. Yeah, I'm fine with that. We actually had it was a stroke of genius. The guy who's still my best friend today, Patrick Duncan. You know, he and I were the campaign managers for Emily Rowe's campaign, and we were living together at the time, and we were probably like a little too late at night, and after a few too many drinks, came up with this idea of spoofing a commercial. And like viral videos weren't that big of a thing back then. Like this was like 11 years ago, 9 or 12 years ago almost. So viral videos were like kind of a thing, but it was like not something that you just made. You didn't just create something and it went viral. And so we just sort of came up with this idea and thought, you know, people would find it like interesting, and it totally exploded, way bigger than we ever imagined it would. And it really spoke to, I think, people's interest in, you know, a couple things that we tried to do, which was really tap into a lot of like, quote unquote, Western patriotism. Like we really ran a campaign around just like, I think we got the color for campaign's purple band because we took that on. We just like wrapped ourselves in the flag, made Emily the most popular person at Western, and ran on that, right? And I think like when you're running in a popular vote, like when you're running in, you know, it's funny, the American election just happened. Like Western does not have an electoral college to elect the USC president, right? Like it's a popular vote. So all you're trying to do is be the most popular candidate. And I know that's a bit like maybe what people don't want me to say right now, but that's the truth, right? Like your goal in this campaign is to get as many votes as possible. And so how do you catapult to being, you know, something that grabs everyone's attention, right? And builds as big a network of support across the campus as possible. So that's what we were really trying to do with the video, and it worked. We were very lucky, but yeah, I'm happy for you to share that around. I forgot how many views it has, and I'm glad it's still out there on YouTube.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I just wanted to ask before I sent it in.
Go nuts.
Cool. Well, Dan, thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. You can take off now to your clients who probably need your support. as well.
I,
But yeah,
I see someone like my shout out for the HUCSC, so I saw
maybe the
All right,
current
thanks, guys.
president.
That
Awesome.
would be
Okay,
me. I
great.
am the
Well,
current
you should reach
president.
out.
Appreciated the shout out.
Nice. You should reach out. We should chat sometime. Thanks, guys. Really,
Would
really
love to.
great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so as long as Vic, Matt, and Mac are willing to hang out with us a little bit longer, we can keep going. I'm gonna pause for a minute and see if there are any questions from not
And
me
Vic
Nick.
did want to comment on, so I
Yeah.
cut her off on something.
No, that's okay. I was just gonna, I think Dan was talking about like how to deal with negative kind of just like talk and space when it comes to elections. And I had written down just like kind of a couple jot notes, just because I thought he did a good job at talking about, like when, individuals are kind of saying negative things to you or about you, but I don't think we really touched a lot on the online context and the fact that right now, there's lots of places where people can like write comments and just like post things in general and have like memes made out of you. And, it's not like the best feeling and it does happen. But I thought it was something that was important to address. And I think to what Dan was talking about a little bit, where he was kind of saying like you need to evaluate in each situation, like whether or not you want to continue talking to that person, whether or not you can, persuade them. It's a bit different in an online context when it's not necessarily, one individual person that you're talking to. You can't necessarily trace a post back to a specific person. And it might not be worth engaging directly on a public forum, being like, trying to like defend yourself and saying like, well, this, that, and the other thing. So I think to kind of not reiterate his point, but branch off of it a little bit, maybe like to just pick your battles on like what you want to fight people on, and what is kind of part of running in an election. And I know it doesn't feel great. I've felt a lot of it, but I know that in an online context, it is important to kind of figure out where and how you're going to draw the lines between what you're going to engage with and to some extent what you're even going to read. I had people before I ran in elections tell me like, don't go on Reddit, just don't do it, don't read it, it's not worth it, it's not going to make you feel good. So I think those boundaries are important to draw before the election even starts, and kind of think about like, to what extent am I going to engage with negative comments and behavior, and to what extent do I just want to focus on myself and my campaign and putting out the best kind of image and platform that I can. And I think in all of that, it's just really important to keep your composure and just try and run as classy of an act as you can. And I know it's frustrating, and there are times where you're going to want to like run away and cry, because it's just like, it's not a fun feeling for people to criticize you, especially when you're running because you're passionate about something and you want to do good by students. And not everybody engages in elections in the same way. Some people really want to learn about candidates, and there are truly just people out there who just want to troll candidates for having the confidence to run and putting themselves on a platform. And so I think it's just important to keep your composure in those situations, and to the best of your ability, like try and stick true to what made you want to run in the first place, kind of what your personal goals are or the goals of your campaign are in running, and just to the very best of your ability, kind of keep your head down and stay focused on what your goals are, and don't let those people dissuade you from getting there. So I thought that was just kind of an important piece to add on to that.
Matt, you've unmuted yourself. Did you want to add something?
No, she kind of spoke to it. I just was going to go anecdotally, the fact that I banished myself from Reddit. Reddit kind of like freaks me out in general anyways, but as Victoria said, you can really drive yourself into a tough place if you just concern yourself with all the comments. Like to some degree, it's okay on like Facebook and some of those mediums to understand what people are saying and how they're interacting with your content. But I think there's definitely a line to draw, and very much for your own mental health. And by no means are we trying to make this sound like this crazy, scary beast. But it's just, it is something that, like, as Vic said, there are trolls out there who just get satisfaction. They don't care who wins. They just want to hop in there. But I just want to provide that context that it's important to, really, really keep yourself well during all this. And I think an important distinction that I think may have been said, but I'll say it once and it'll kind of carry for the rest of this, in the fact that Victoria, Mackenzie, and myself all ran pre-COVID. So anything we're saying, we're trying our best to kind of adapt to what the new year will look like, admitting the fact that it is new and we won't have all the direct insight that will be completely applicable to this. But obviously there's still a lot of content that we're happy to help with. But I just want to say that one piece, that there will be new dynamics at play that we haven't necessarily experienced.
Yeah,
Melissa,
and the one thing that I want to.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I just want to add one thing, that it is important to make a distinction between at-large elections and like elections like the vice president external, which are only by council. At-large elections are where it is really, really important, because how you win is you just increase who votes for you. It's not really about changing minds. Like Dan said, if somebody hates you, they're not going to vote for you. It's really not worth wasting your time or your emotional energy trying to change their mind, as bad as that might sound and as much as it might upset them. But it is a different story when you're running for a position like mine or Victoria's with vice president, external affairs and university affairs, because there is a set number of votes that each person can have. That is when it is really important to have those long, nuanced conversations with people, especially with it being a ranked ballot. So it's important that even if you're not their first choice, their second and third choice are really, really important and can be the difference between winning and losing an election.
And then I'm just going to add a comment. For any of you who are considering running for any position that's going to require you to have a large campaign team, just do be aware that your campaign volunteers will also take those negative comments, and they will hurt them just as much. I have not been on the kind of forefront of a campaign in a very, very long time, but I certainly have spent a lot of time recently working with candidates. And I'd say that when I was a candidate, those negative comments hurt. They hurt way more when I was a friend or someone that I was willing to give my time for free to in a volunteer role. That one hurt way more. So just be aware of that. And that's probably a conversation to have with your campaign manager about how you as a team are going to handle that, because that will also burn out your volunteers.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point from Nick. And I think I kind of building off more of what Mackenzie was saying too, is that in this session too, like all this is intended to be is to help answer and clear up uncertainty or help in any way we possibly can. So also don't hesitate that if you're more looking at a counselor role, or if you're more looking at, as Mackenzie said, one of the internally like the UA or EA roles, it doesn't have to all be about the at-large massive USC presidential campaign. We're very happy, as Victoria said, very experienced counselor. I ran once in counselor. Like there is other experiences within elections, because I know not everyone here may be running for one specific, like for USC president, there may be other roles. So do not hesitate to be more pointed if that would help you, because all we're trying to do here is just provide clarity and provide support for you in the coming months.
Thanks, Matt. So maybe, are there any questions from the group?
I actually have one.
Yeah.
So in terms of like the USC presidential like election, what is the timeline looking like? Because obviously, like as Matt just recently tested to, with COVID, everything's going to look insurmountably different. But what is the general sense of a timeline that we're looking at, or like certain things that I should keep in mind with the COVID election that may be different from the normal election?
So I can speak to the dates in terms of when the campaign's going to run, in terms of planning your campaign and that kind of thing, and kind of walking it back to right now. I'll maybe throw that to the panel, but nominations will open on January 5th. So not the first day back from the break, but the day after. And then you'll have until the following, I think it's the following Tuesday, to get your nominations in. So that means getting signatures, paying your bond, all that stuff. That's all going to be online. After the nomination period, we'll have campaigning starts essentially the next day. And that'll run, let me just look at my calendar. That will run until the end of January. So I think we've got voting happening the last week of January. So it's the Monday and Tuesday, which are the 25th and 26th. And you can still campaign on those days within certain parameters. And then the results will be announced on the 28th. So you're looking at a slightly more compact timeline than we've had in past years, because we heard a lot that it's a really exhausting process for people. So we're trying to ease up on that a little bit. But what that means for you as a candidate in terms of planning right now, I'm going to flip that to the panel to answer that.
If I can ask one more clerical question to you, Melissa.
Yeah.
is that timeline or those dates available publicly? And if so, where can people find them for their reference? And the second question would be, I'm not sure because I haven't worked with you, Mark, on this, but like if there's like an all candidates meeting or somewhere where people will get kind of more information about the logistics of it outside of this kind of campaign school series, if that's incorporated into that timeline at all.
Yeah, so we're actually working on updating our website right now. So the voteusc.ca, or I actually have an email from Jeff in my inbox about this. Or uscelections.ca, they both redirect to the same place. There'll be a calendar of events once that's up and live. So it has everything you'll need to know, from nominations to things like the all candidates meeting that Vic is talking about. So there will be an all candidates meeting on the last day of nominations. So nominations close, I think, at 4 or 4:30, and then we'll have an all candidates meeting on Zoom at 5 o'clock, where we'll go through any other dates you need to know. We'll go through the policies and procedures and bylaws and all of that stuff, so that everyone has a good understanding of that and can be in good shape to avoid violations through the campaign process.
Just to kind of, I guess, expand on that a bit, what's the timeline looking like for the internal elections for university affairs and external affairs?
So those ones will start a little bit later. The election will open, or the nomination period, sorry, will open on the 29th of January. We do have something that needs to go to council. Our legislative calendar needs a little bit of an update, but that'll be open. So the nomination period will be open either until the 12th of February or the 19th of February, depending on what council decides to do with that calendar. The idea behind that, the bylaw was just amended. The updated version will be on our website when it's all ready to go. We're trying to avoid making people campaign over reading week, because that was a piece of feedback we got from last year that is hard. So the nomination period will go there, and then the campaign period goes until March 6th, because that's the day before the annual general meeting, and then the election happens at the AGM on the 7th. So it happens the day of. Again, all of that stuff, once we've got the calendar up on the website, everything will be there for you as well.
Okay, thanks. I also have a question for Victoria and Mackenzie, if that's all right. So Victoria, you specifically ran for both an at-large and an internal election. I guess what do you think is most important in an internal election, either compared to a at-large election or just in general?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think Mackenzie made a good point in that there are, like, the distinction, I guess, between an at-large and an internal election is that there is a fixed number of votes. And I think it's also important that you know who can vote for you. Whereas when you're in a general election, you're kind of just putting your name and face everywhere because you want everybody to have the same recognition. You just want to see, who can I influence, who will walk by this poster and make a decision to vote for me. Whereas in the internal election, it's a lot more personalized because you know who the counselors are and faculty presidents and whatnot that are going to be voting for you. So there's that piece to it. Also with Mackenzie and my roles, the portfolios are a bit more specific. So I guess in terms of what you're promising and how you build out your platform, the issues that you tackle and the way you build your platform will be more specific to the files that you'll actually be working on. Whereas the president platform is a lot more like big picture, a bit more visionary, like setting a vision, setting a kind of strategic, like what you want to accomplish, how you're going to manage a team, how you're going to, manage, different relationships with different stakeholders. Whereas Mackenzie can maybe speak to this a little bit as well, but like in my role, it was more about, the specific files that I would be dealing with, how I would interact with them. And I think the council being the audience that you're kind of marketing yourself to knows more than the general student population about those topics. So that changes the way that you advocate for yourself and the way that you present yourself in that context. I feel like I had one more thing that I was going to say. I was also going to say that when you campaign for an internal election, usually it requires more like one-on-one conversations, or kind of just like sitting down with each person, talking about your experiences, what you hope to do. Whereas, like I mentioned earlier, for an at-large election, it's more about just like putting your message and your face and your name everywhere, and talking more in front of like bigger groups. Whereas, and that might be something that is appealing to some people, to run in a smaller election that's a bit more targeted in terms of who you're talking to and how you campaign, because it is quite different. And I can like clarify any of that if it was not specific enough, but that's just like a general distinction.
Yep, I can
think
add
that
to that.
makes sense.
Oh,
Thanks.
sorry. I can add too that in a general election, you're trying to appeal to everybody, and in the internal elections, you're really not. You only need 50% of the vote to win. So sometimes you can tailor specific policies or things in your platform to specific groups that you're trying to capture. One example that I can give that is pretty obvious is historically engineering as a faculty on Western's council votes as a block. So their council endorses the candidates in the order that they are wishing to support. And then the Western USC counselors who are from engineering are kind of tied to voting in that way. And that's just a procedural example of something that's different. So there's also different strategies that you can take depending on how many people are running to tie yourself to candidates who might be similar to you, but might have less of the vote because it is a ranked election. Like, for example, if there's somebody who, there's like examples where you might get the most amount of vote at the very beginning, but because you're not enough people's second and third choices, you still might not end up winning because somebody has a wider array of support, even though it might not be first and second. So there's a lot of different ways where that can end out either in your favor or not in your favor. But that's just a good example of how it is a little bit different.
And the ranked ballot actually is something that is the same with the at-large and internal election, presidential election. The rule was changed a number of years ago, but I think since then, up until last year, there had only ever been 2 candidates running, so you didn't see that rule reflected. But if there is more than 2 candidates in either of the internal or at-large elections, the USC does use a ranked ballot. So what that means is, let's use last year an example, there were 4 candidates, so all 4 candidates would kind of get their distribution, and then the person who came in last place gets crossed out, and all of whoever put them second and someone else third, those second place votes get redistributed to the remaining 3 candidates, and they continue to do that process until they get to one final candidate. So that process is the same. The one thing that I did forget to mention in terms of running in an internal election is that you do have to consider the recently elected president's platform as well, because that might shape what you do and how you present, what you want to work on based on like the recent, mission and strategic kind of vision that the president was then elected on. So I would say that's something important to consider as well.
Any other questions? Okay, so I'm noting the time. One question that I'm going to put to the panel, with the idea that this is really about answering the where do I start question. So Dan left us with kind of 2 things: the idea that you should be thinking about the platform and looking at kind of mapping support across the various constituencies. What would you, as people who have run an election before, what would you add to that, if anything? Like, what if people are leaving this call today and they want to get started tomorrow, what is the thing that you would suggest that they do?
So first, I think you have to do a little bit of soul searching about what you're passionate about and what you care about on campus, because there are things that I guess you can put in your platform, but it's really important that you really care about them and that you can speak to them genuinely, because people can see through that right away. I would also recommend looking at past platforms and kind of what other people did. So you can look at what's been promised before, how you feel about it. The Gazette's probably going to ask you a question about how something's promised every year and how it can happen. They might not be able to think back long enough to a wine rack in the UCC, so you might be able to recycle that one. But I think that it's important to know what you're passionate about, and if that's wine, that's wine. But things like sustainability, gender-based violence, and topics that students are really passionate about on the campus, and what perspectives you can offer that might be different, as well as looking what's been done on other university campuses is a really great way to kind of come up with some ideas. Because I know, like, thinking from like stage one about how to make Western more sustainable is something that's really, really difficult. So you can look to campuses like McMaster, like UBC to see what they're doing on these different issues and what their student unions are doing and how we can bring some of those ideas to Western.
I would, pardon? Oh, I thought I cut you off. I would say, like, I would echo what Mackenzie said, and then I would kind of branch off of as well, saying that, first of all, if people are telling you that you should run or, you know, encouraging you to do it, I would say that's probably a good place to start. It's a good thing, I think, for people to be telling you that you should be exploring these roles. And so if that's what brought you here, I'm happy that you are here. But also I just want to make a note that, like, for a lot of women, that's not the case. Women have to be asked a lot of times to actually pursue a role. And I know there are lots of people, and myself included in that kind of bounce back and forth of like, should I do it? Should I not do it? I'm not really sure. I don't really know if I should win or if I could win. And I would say, like, if it's something you're contemplating, you just have to make a commitment. You kind of, like Mackenzie said, have to do a bit of soul searching, figure out, you know, what motivates you, why do you want to be in this role? What are the things you think you could change? How do you think you could be, you know, an asset to whatever organization in whatever capacity, and kind of just commit. And I know that's not like a super helpful piece of advice, but I think making that decision will allow the wheels to start turning as to like how you can make that then become a reality. But I think the longer you go kind of back and forth and second guess yourself, the more of a disservice you're doing to yourself in being able to build out that successful campaign that you can be really proud of. And I think in doing that, to Mackenzie's point, you want to do a lot of soul searching. You want to look at some of the issues that you're interested in, but you can also talk to other people and see, you know, what are they interested in, especially if you're running for a role that's broader than your own personal experiences. You want to talk to other students that have different perspectives. You want to really be in touch with what the current issues are on campus. And you will get a lot of feedback and ideas from those consultations and from those sessions. Just like a good understanding of what the issues are on campus. But then I would also say you should consult with, like Mackenzie said, kind of, you know, people who have run in the past, or people who are currently in the role that you're interested in, or just like mentors, whether they be like older students or people who have run in elections before, that can give you some of that perspective that like maybe we can give today, or we could give in like another session. But I think having those mentors who can give you that perspective, give you that like feedback and advice on like what they would have changed or done differently, I think those are really valuable as well, and those will help you begin to think about, you know, what those issues are that you're really passionate about, or how you want to go about running the campaign. And then I'm going to disagree with Dan a little bit and say that you should look into the feasibility of some of your items. It'll really strengthen your campaign to know, you know, if you're promising something, how you might go about doing that. I'm not saying you have to have every I dotted and every T crossed, but it'll help you in figuring out and, you know, pitching yourself as a candidate. If you can speak to, you know, this is something I want to do, and these are maybe some of the first steps I would take to get that idea in motion. And I think students do appreciate when candidates can speak on some of the things that they are promising. And I think to kind of like the year-over-year issue that we see, you know, with things like the Gazette kind of questioning, you know, why didn't things get done? Those are really helpful if you can acknowledge maybe where things didn't go right in the past for other candidates, and maybe how you could mitigate that, and working out just some of the feasibility of some of the things that you're promising, in my opinion, would be helpful.
Yeah, and I guess, oh, Mac, did you want to go?
Nope, I was just going to say I actually have to hop off for another meeting that starts at 4. But thank you guys for coming today. I know I wasn't supposed to be here, but surprise, and hopefully I'll see you all in the election.
Thanks, Mac.
Thanks, Mac. Yeah, I was just going to offer kind of my quick 2 cents, in the sense that I think what Mac and Vic both said is dead on. There's as a little teaser, there's we're going to be releasing a bunch of briefs and some other communications regarding elections starting next week. So this document will be out, and you can read, but there's some pieces of it that kind of played into a lot of what they both just said now. I think, to what Vic said, I think, yeah, there's definitely that balance to strike, but I also think I would never, like, never limit yourself. Like always think like, why hasn't that been done before? And yeah, and obviously where there's a line, but I think that's what Vic was saying, is that like find that feasibility, but also don't be afraid to question what's like the status quo and what's been there. So I'd heavily encourage that. I guess like something that I just wanted to say too, that was in line with what Victoria and Mackenzie both said, is when I started, I remembered it feeling like this just brick wall of like, how do I even start to get through this? Like that first step was easily the hardest thing you'll do in getting it moving. And for me, the kind of the term that I use, that there's a bit of a domino effect involved, that once you get it moving, once you start asking people, and like, yes, your first consultations will be a little bit awkward. You're not really going to like know the right questions, and that's part of it. And every single person who's been in there has gone through that to learn which works, and that's totally fine. And maybe you start with people you're a little bit more comfortable with, because it'll allow them to try it out, and they won't they won't be too critical of what you're doing. So I'd say like the biggest thing is just to start moving. As Vic said, a great starting place is consultation. You can also gain information, you gain kind of perspective, but you may also meet people that really align with what you are wanting to do, that maybe you haven't really known before. You like met them once or know of them, but then it turns out you guys have very similar ideas and you end up really hitting it off. Like it's one of those things that can just start that domino moving really, really rapidly. So in addition to everything they're saying, I really do encourage you to just start moving, start looking to build team and start consulting, and it'll all start falling in place, even if it doesn't feel like it right off the bat. Just have faith.
I'll wait here for a minute to see if anybody else has questions.
I do.
Yeah, Kanisha, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Well, thank you so much, Victoria and Matt, and Nick as well, for all of your insight. I know, Victoria and Matt, you mentioned that you ran for USC counselor, and I was wondering if you had any. I would love to hear more about like your thoughts on your first campaign experience, and running for that position. I know going from first year rep, Victoria, that must have been very different for you. Do you have any insight to share on like your experience?
Yeah, I guess I can start. It was actually another one of the first year reps with me when I was in first year on SSC that was like, oh, we should run for council. We should run as, USC counselors. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do it. I don't really know what I want to do next year. And he's like, come on, like, let's just sign your paper. You can do it. It's only a couple signatures, like whatever. So I handed in my form on the very last day, not really knowing what I was signing up for. But that was kind of what catapulted me into what turned into almost a little mini career in like student politics and involvement in the USC for a number of years. So it's definitely something I don't regret and something I would encourage you or anyone else on this call to look into. What I would say about counselor elections is they're a little bit different than like the executive roles on the USC or even like a faculty counselor position. And in like the best way possible, I would say like they're not as serious as some of the like larger scale, wider reaching elections or positions. You really do have the ability in these counselor roles to do a bit more of like experimentation with your platform and with your campaign, because it's a bit of like a more targeted, smaller audience that you're working towards. I would say, having connection or like having been involved and having an understanding of your faculty council is a really good advantage to have. And if for anyone who like is maybe interested in a counselor role who is not already involved in the faculty council, I would say that's a really good place to start, because as a counselor, you would sit both on the USC and on your faculty council. So I think having a good understanding of how that relationship works and what that role looks like would be a good place to start. I think with a counselor role, it's important to understand like what your role then would be on the USC's council as well, and the capacity that you have to kind of influence and impact policy decisions and just like generally decisions that the USC makes. And so that's how maybe I would shape your platform when it comes to running as a counselor, is looking maybe less so at like broad, like big changes that you can make on campus, and more changes that you can influence through your either individual faculty council or through the USC. So definitely those like broader topics can be addressed through the USC, but not to the same extent that you would promise on like a presidential platform at large. And then I would say when you're running within a like a faculty, you can look within, and the faculty councils, the reason why I say that's a good place to start is because on a faculty council, you can see kind of the breakdown of the different department representatives and the things that the council does. And that gives you a good sense of like who is impacted by the work of a faculty council. And so if you're running as a counselor role, maybe you want to talk to students in different departments and how their experiences vary and what they would want you to do as the liaison between your faculty council and the USC. What issues do, like, say, science or social science students or whatever faculty or affiliate you come from, what do they want to see represented from their specific group on the USC, and how through the nature of your role in the USC can you impact the work on your faculty council. So I can like clarify that if that was unclear, but I would say generally that's like the first bit. I would say it's been a while since I ran to be a counselor, and it's going to look really different this year. So I don't want to give like too much like specific advice on how to do that, but I would say that some of the more like daunting comments that we've made about elections in general, I would say apply a little bit less to those like counselor roles, because they really are supposed to be like entry level like election positions for students that maybe haven't been involved in the USC before or want to get involved initially. So it's a really good place to start. And if you have more questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I was just gonna hop real quick, and like Victoria is the expert on USC counselor, no doubt. She served 3 terms. I think she said that at the beginning, but is a veteran there. Like obviously 2 as counselor, 1 as president. The only thing I guess I'd add, because I was someone who ran for it in my 3rd going into 4th, which is just kind of like, I think a little, I don't want to say like unconventional, but like as Victoria said, a lot of people tend to run in kind of 1st year, 2nd year. But I was someone who was very new to student politics, never did in high school, but came in just curious and wanted to kind of test my hand. So for me, I had never really done anything like it before. I came in, didn't know kind of the expectations, but what I guess like found helped was, yeah, it's much different. It's much smaller scale in terms of like, you're not trying to get every single constituency within the campus. You can be a lot more directed into what you know and what you're part of. But what helped with me, I found it was just keep it simple as well in terms of what you're actually going for. You don't need this massive platform whole kind of thing. It's be very deliberate about what you believe in, like bring some personality of like what you've heard and what you think you can really uniquely bring, as well as, and just keep it very clean, very clear as to what you're wanting to bring to the table. And it's, as Victoria said, it was a great role. It's a great way to kind of, yeah, test your hand if you've never really been involved or have been and want to kind of lead into further roles. But I just want to say that piece too, that we kind of have like a bit of yin and yang in this, in the sense that I was kind of the newbie into 4th year, and then Vic was the career. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
The other thing, I think that's a really important perspective as well, because there are a lot of people that like in their 3rd and 4th year just like want to be involved in the USC and choose to do it as a counselor as well. But something that's different about the counselor elections as well is that usually the faculty councils host some kind of like Q&A. It's not really a debate, so you don't have to expect to like go up against a lot of people. But you know, a lot of faculty councils will host that kind of forum. So there are opportunities for you to talk to people in the faculty and kind of express your ideas in a more relaxed setting than like a, you know, live stream debate would be for the USC, where people are not necessarily like attacking you or your ideas. It's kind of just a forum for everyone to say like, this is why I think I would be good at this role. This is why I want to be involved. And the other distinction I think to make with counselor roles is that there's more of them available usually. It's proportional to the number of students in the faculty. So if you're in a smaller faculty, there'll be less positions available. But in some of the larger faculties, you don't necessarily have to win the election. You just kind of have to be like the top 6 or the top, you know, 5. So I think that's a distinction to make as well. And I think that adds to it being a bit less stressful than some of the larger roles, is that, you know, you just do your best and make it across kind of the finish line. And then once you're there, it doesn't matter if you came in 1st or 3rd, you still get the same role. And there really is no difference once you all start in that role. So that's another important distinction to make.
Any other questions from folks?
A question I had was like a follow-up to one I had before. just in respects to like, as you guys have ran in so many elections, so you know like what the typical gist is like what's going to happen, how it's going to look, how it's going to see. How do you see that being different this year, and how do you recommend adapting to like the more virtual aspects of it and being able to still reach out to people as well as still like get your word out and stuff like that?
I can try. I was gonna say, I think Victoria and I are both kind of processing that question because, as we said, and like as you indicated, Parth, it's something we haven't experienced directly. I guess we can speculate a little bit in the sense that there'll just be new strategies that will need to be come up with, in the sense that you're running and competing in different arenas than before. It's going to be on social media. There's going to be a lot of those kind of aspects that obviously there's a huge dynamic of that when we ran, like there's no doubt. But I think it's going to be that much more kind of leaned on. So I guess that's kind of one of my main things I would foresee, obviously just speculating because I don't have my crystal ball right now. But I think the main thing is just, it's going to take some creativity. I think it's going to take a lot of work in the sense that just as like when we ran within those elections, like it takes a lot of time out of your day, boothing and whatever that may be. So I think there'll be having to find new ways to still like garner that same kind of connection throughout the campaign period. But I think the main thing is it's just gonna test people in new ways. But it'll be so important to see, especially with judging by where COVID's heading. We have no real definite answer there, but some of the term may experience similar Zoom aspects, obviously. So if you can show yourself to be quite well suited to run and figure that out online, you'll be well served as the respective position you run for. So that's kind of my piece. That's definitely a good question, but a difficult one to answer. I'll turn to Vic on her thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down a couple things, but I think generally the like disclaimer on all of this is that we still really don't know, and that it's really hard for us to advise on an experience that we don't have. So as much as I would love to consider myself an election veteran, it's really not at all useful in this context. Well, that's not true, not at all useful, but it's definitely more difficult. I would say the big caveat this year is that students are going to be harder to reach. I think students are pretty burnt out just generally with being online. You know, there's a lot of things on people's feeds, whether it be social media or just like your inbox, your email, whatever. Like students spend a lot of time on their screens. So I think it's going to be, to Matt's point, really important to be creative in how you engage students, because it is going to be a lot more difficult to reach them. And I think just being as knowledgeable as you can about the process of how the election is going to run. Melissa's a great resource for that. And just like the EGC and like the USC elections team in general is a really great resource for that. And I would just say continue to ask questions as things unfold. Don't leave yourself in a position where you're in a gray area and you're not really sure, what's allowed or how what you're doing is going to maybe impact the way that the rules are written and stuff. Like, read up on the bylaw, make sure you understand kind of the arena that you're playing in. And if you have clarifying questions, like don't be afraid to ask those questions, even in the middle of the election. It's okay to send in emails and say like, hey, I'm planning on doing this thing. I don't really know, like, is this okay? How should I adapt? Like, how is this different? The CRO, DRO, Melissa, the elections team, like they're happy to answer questions even throughout the election period. So don't feel like once it starts, you can't ask questions anymore. Because that I think will be really important this year. And I think also it's just really important to utilize social media. I did not have a great social media presence last year. And I think to my earlier point of kind of like planning out your just plan in general and how you're going to get out the vote, how you're going to share your ideas and like who you are as a candidate. I think this will be a year we don't really have to sit down and figure out like, how am I going to market myself? What different outlets am I going to use? What kind of timeline am I playing with? How do I have to balance or compete with potentially the social media platforms of other candidates, of just like school happening? You have to remember that like the USC will run a general campaign on elections and encouraging people to vote, obviously not for any particular candidate, but just in general. Then there's going to be a number of candidates running for president at large, all the faculty and affiliate elections are happening around the same time. You've got people running as counselors. So there's going to be a lot of noise on social media in that period of time. So that I don't really have like a way to fix that, but I think that's just something to consider, that you're going to have to be creative, or whether it be like, how and when you post or what your content looks like so that it stands out from other people. Those are just going to be important things to consider. Yeah, I think I'll stop that one there.
Any other questions?
And if I can interject for a
Yeah.
second, there's no dumb questions either. Like even if even if it seems small, like if it seems like how do you know what color you get to wear? Like whatever, even like stuff like that. Like I remember there's so much of that in my head that I wish I could have just like flushed out. So like we are totally okay to answer anything like that. Like, and I'm sure it'll benefit everyone else to hear too. So I just want to make that very clear that we've got a little under 15 left. So feel free to ask like anything as nebulous or minuscule as you would like.
I have like a pretty it might be a minuscule question, but I guess we'll see. I'm just wondering if any of the USC bylaws for the election coming up will be changed because of COVID rules, or if there's anything like in specific that's been changed just for the pandemic this year.
Melissa, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I was going to say I can speak to that. So the big thing that changed, so we did at our last council meeting go through the bylaws and the policies and update them. The big thing that is changed is that the Elections Governance Committee has a little bit more leeway to respond quickly if COVID forces us to. So for example, let's say school shuts down again and we all go back to totally being online and we have to adapt quickly. We can do that. At this point, we're expecting, like Matt said, we have no crystal balls, but given current trends, we're expecting that most of this is going to be online, most of our campaigning, and I say most, probably all. We may end up in a place where we're actively telling people that you cannot campaign in person, but we don't quite know yet what that's going to look like. We're definitely encouraging everyone to plan as though it's going to be online. Plan for virtual consultations like Zoom sessions, all of that stuff. Some of the rules are still in place, but they probably don't make a whole lot of sense for this year. We don't expect that there's going to be any campaigning in residences, for example. The rules are still in there because they're important for future years, but for this year, it's probably not very relevant to you. Probably not putting up a lot of posters on campus, so like worrying about the sizes and all of that. We'll cover it so that you know what they are just in case, but probably not something that you really need to worry about. As Vic said though, if you have questions, and I know we have a session next Friday with the CRO and DRO, so our Chief Returning Officer and Deputy Returning Officer, they're going to go through a lot of these policies and the bylaws. But I know they'll say next week as well, if you have questions, please ask. We don't want you to be feeling stuck in a gray space. We don't want you to just feel like you have to guess. The election isn't about like tricking you. It's about making sure that you can put forward the best version of your candidacy that you can. And that means from us that you understand the rules and you understand what is okay and what isn't. And to Matt's point, like there really are no dumb questions. If you're at all uncertain, send the email and we'll answer it, because chances are good that you are not the only person with the question, and it might just end up benefiting everyone if we can clarify it early on.
Yeah. And
Thanks a lot, Melissa.
And Vic, I was going to add something, but Vic, did you want to?
I was just going to say, like, that's where the all candidates meeting will be, I think, really helpful as well. Where, like, obviously it's great to ask as many questions as you have kind of throughout your planning process up until the election. But once all the nominations are in and everything's kind of locked in, that's when we sit everyone down and we say, okay, in case you haven't looked at it already, here are all the rules. And I hope at that point, when we're, at the election, we'll be able to tell you exactly. Whereas right now we're like, we're planning for a certain situation, but if things improve, maybe there's a possibility to do other things. So at that point in time, the all candidates meeting, we'll be able to say, like, this is the way it's going to be. and we'll walk everyone through that bylaw so that it's not kind of intimidating or hard to read. Because I know when I was in first year and I read it for the first time, I like printed out all 40 pages, which is like not sustainable and not good. But I like went through and highlighted things because I like it was really hard for me to read. So I think that's where the all candidates meeting will be really helpful as well. And you can continue, like I said, to ask questions even after that fact. But I think that is like a good distinction, just as like a catch-all, that like everyone will be told the rules before the election.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think what Melissa said was super important. Something I learned like during the election, probably about halfway through, that like, you know, and I don't know why, but like you, as a candidate, I was a little bit intimidated by CRO, DRO. Like they were incredible people, but I was like, man, I don't want to bug them. Like I know they've got a lot going on, but they are incredible resources to ask them about that. It's so much easier to ask them something before than to take a violation as a result of something that you just assumed. And it's something that they are happy to do. I'm being very cognizant to not overload them because I know they'll have a lot of questions, but I know it's from like my end, that was extremely helpful and like kind of like I don't even want to call it like a life hack, but like something that just made everything a lot easier, that if you just be very clear with what you're trying to do. I was somebody who like by no means ever wanted to like play in the gray that much. I'd rather just be clean. I didn't want to deal with violations as much as humanly possible. So yeah, that'd be kind of my recommendation is like, don't hesitate to, especially as it gets closer, as Victoria said, when things become even more flushed out, we know what the province is looking like. We know what COVID's looking like, at least closer to the election date. The EGC as well as the CRO and DRO respectively will be a huge resource and asset to you all. So I just wanted to reaffirm that.
I see that we've got a question in the chat about the campaign color procedure. So basically, campaign colors are only relevant to the president and vice president. If you're running for a councillor role, you don't need to worry about it. But for those positions, colors are first come, first serve. You'll see on the nomination form, we'll ask you to choose a color, your first choice and second choice. If for some reason you can't have either of those, we'll contact you and ask. But all of the applications or the nominations, will be timestamped, so we know who's first in order. So you just tell us what you want, and we will confirm when we confirm your candidacy. So we go through and we check all the signatures and make sure that everyone's actually still a current student and that they're in the right faculty and all that kind of thing, for counselors anyway. We then send an email saying that, yep, you're all good to go, and here's your color. There will be other information in that as well. We'll confirm dates and do all of that stuff, but that's the procedure for that one.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, as Dan indicated, purple has been banned since I think Emily Rowe has. Yeah, it
was him. 100%. It was him and Emily.
because purple became just an unfair advantage. So that's the one color you can't use. But I just figured that was fun to have the fact that we had Dan, the guy who basically broke purple, was on our call, was pretty cool. So I just want to make that point. And if you haven't already, the video they did is incredible. Was really well done. So check that out, obviously too. Most of you, I'm sure you're going to the next question as well. With COVID, I can maybe hop in on that, and then Victoria, feel free to add in from there. This is definitely a really important question. It's difficult because, as we said, in our years when we ran, it was a lot of, to be completely honest, I didn't have a whole lot of like socials per se in terms of like maintaining that team dynamic. Team dynamic is really important, no doubt. But for me, it was something that it would be fostered seeing the people in libraries, in the atrium, in like maybe when you're going out or things like just kind of those happenstance, but you kind of keep that alive. You also will have meetings and things along those lines. So that may be something that, given you're not going to be bumping into people very often, I'm sure, it's something to really maybe be a little bit more deliberate about, to keep that together. Maybe like once or so often, like this is personal preference, but like maybe have a get to know you kind of thing, just given people may not have that chance really at all. Even if it's a Zoom, it might be a little awkward, but it could be something to consider. But I also think the main thing, and that I would probably say to like managing that team dynamic, is a lot about, like, I'll use the word gratitude, but it's what I mean by that is the fact that the people that are supporting you are, and this blew my mind and it was really hard for me to wrap my head around, was that why is this person who's just incredible and so smart and so capable dedicating hours and hours of time to me for no pay? and literally just to see me get something that like that I had a goal of or something like that. And it was something that's hard. I don't know, like asking favors, it's something that maybe is weird in my head, but I think as long as you're very deliberate about just making sure they continue to see why they're supporting you, putting that work in, and I think I froze.
I think your video froze, but the audio's okay.
Or it was
Well,
okay.
maybe not anymore.
Sorry, I froze
Oh, there you
really
go.
hard there. Basically, all I was going to say is that make sure to show them your thanks in whatever way that means to you. Notes, like call, like anything you can do, and that'll keep them happy and keep that alive. But I'm sure Victoria has stuff to add there. But it's definitely a very important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I honestly was gonna say something pretty similar. I think the only thing I'll like change about it is that I don't really know if there's a way to fix the fact that this year you might have to be a little bit more explicit and deliberate about like making friendships and like, you know, pulling your team together. And I know that can seem uncomfortable. And it's like not as organic as it would be if you could just like run into someone a bunch of times and then be like, hey, what do you think about, you know, being a part of my campaign? But I think people can appreciate the situation this year and that it's going to be really different and that it is really difficult genuinely to get together with people and kind of make those organic connections. So I think as long as you are like almost like over communicating the fact that like, you know, this is kind of what you're interested in doing, like just being really clear about, you know, what you're hoping to do, how you're hoping to get them involved. I think that's an important piece of it as well. When you're like building your team, if you're trying to like kind of put people in different portfolios or recruit them for a specific skill or position, I think it's important that you tell them that and you kind of explain to them, you know, what the time commitment's going to look like or what your expectations of them are. And I know that maybe doesn't help for like the team bonding and genuine dynamic of things, but I think it can help people make a more educated decision as to like whether or not they can commit that time to supporting you, because I would totally agree with what Matt said, where like you will get people who just blow you away in what they do and how they continue to support you. But what's not as fun is like having people that maybe even are your close friends that want to support you, but just cannot due to time commitment or just like other things that they have going on. And that's the most uncomfortable thing to kind of work around. And the dynamic that you have to navigate is like if you have a really good friend who just like doesn't have the capacity to support, you know, your campaign in a really heavy role, maybe they want to be just more of a volunteer generally. I think that's important to have those conversations as you recruit people for your team and say like, you know, how would you like to be involved in this? Or I'm thinking about this. What does that look like for you? How can we work to kind of make it work for both of us? And what I used to do as well is like think about, you know, who would benefit in what roles. Like if you know that there are people, like for example, Mackenzie, when she was a campaign manager for like a president and vice president slate, when that used to be the case a couple of years ago, like she's interested in kind of going into politics. So her being a campaign manager was actually like a valuable experience for her to then leverage potentially in the workforce later. So if you know people that are interested in like graphic design or interested in going into politics, that might be a good place to start. And they don't necessarily have to be your best friends, but they can be people that you think would benefit from those experiences. And that will kind of help the buy-in and recruitment of people as well, as if you can, you know, make it a meaningful experience both for you and for them in whatever the capacity of their role is. And to Matt's point, just like really appreciate your team. Think about what it would be like to be in their shoes and have to kind of volunteer a bunch of their time and energy to like help someone else succeed. I think it's like a pretty selfless act for someone to do. And I think just really like over appreciating your team and making sure that they know how much you recognize their efforts and really value what they're doing for you, I think is really important. Another point that I just wanted to make that kind of ties into this, but I just wanted to make sure I said it, was that you're going to find yourself potentially in situations where people who are close to you don't choose to support you, choose to stay apolitical. They don't really want to be involved. And that can also be something that's difficult to navigate as well. So I think that's just like important context to have and just something to maybe prepare yourself for, that you might find people that, you know, choose to support another candidate or who choose to just not get involved. And I think, you know, that's why it's important to start early and to, you know, just like build as big of a team as you can, because you never know kind of how the election season will play out, and you want to create as strong of a team as you can, of like a network of people that really believe in you and support what you're trying to do. I saw a question in the chat. So with respect to recruiting people or starting a team, you can start as early as now. I think the important, and maybe I'll toss it to Melissa for this, but I know there was at least a section in the bylaw that talked about there's like a limitation to the size of your team before the actual campaign period starts. So it's just important for you to kind of keep track of who you've like signed on to your team as an official member or volunteer, because at any time the elections committee can ask you to provide that list. And if you're over the number of people that are allowed before the campaign period starts, that's technically a violation. So you just want to make sure that you are kind of adhering to those rules, and I'll throw it to Melissa in a second. But I think the other thing that you can do as well is there's no limit on like who you can consult and who you can meet with. So don't feel like there's a limit to like who you can talk to about, you know, your potential candidacy or some of the ideas that you have in building your campaign. There's just a limit in terms of like how many people you can have. Because I mean, if you started super early, you could reasonably recruit like a good portion of campus, and then it kind of makes things unfair. So that's why that precaution is in place. And Melissa, if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I think you hit all of the key points. I'm just quickly confirming how many people you can have, because I don't want to give you the wrong number. I believe it's up to 50 people, but I will confirm that for you, and for sure the CRO and DRO will have that information at the session next week. So as Vic said, you do need to keep a pretty comprehensive list, because there are some provisions around you know, what kind of responsibility candidates have for the actions of their volunteers, and how you can kind of distance yourself, so that if, you know, you have a volunteer going rogue and breaking all kinds of rules, you know, how do you mitigate that and demonstrate that like you didn't know about it, or if someone claims to be acting on behalf of your campaign when they're not, that's when that list of volunteers can be like, okay, look, these are my people, this person is not one of my people. So just having that documentation and having a sense of where people are at is really important. Did that help? Awesome. So it is after 4:30 at this point, and I'm sure everyone has stuff they need to be getting on with their evening. Vic and Matt, any final thoughts? Anything you wanted to say that nobody asked you about, but you think we should all know?
I get my quick is, well, great, like you've made a great start to come out to this and start getting the information. So like kudos there. And also like, that's like, you're on your way. So that's at least one, as I said, that big brick wall, that's one step towards, which is a great step. I guess, yeah, the brief thing I would say is just like, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Like, that's why we're all here. We're at Victoria and I both said, like, really just want to ensure that this is like, an election is successful and you feel like you have the information that you need to be successful. There's going to be other, I think we alluded to throughout this, there's going to be other sessions. There's also going to be great communications coming out regarding, like I talked about, the briefs. So there's going to be a lot of information probably in the coming 4 weeks. So really just keep posted. Like, subtle plug, follow Western USC on Insta. That's just where a lot of our information comes from. So it's a plug, but it's also going to be really helpful, I promise. So that was a voice crack. Wow. So yeah, so definitely check us out there. Reach out anytime. I unfortunately do have one that started at 4:30, so I'm going to bounce quickly. I'll turn it to Vic, but thank you so much, everyone, for all your great questions, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is kind of what I said earlier, but don't question yourself too much. I think you being here and being at these sessions is a really great first step. And if it's something you're considering, I would just encourage you to go for it. I've run a number of elections and I've won and lost at pretty different magnitudes. So I would say, like, Yeah, yes, it's difficult to run an election, and it's definitely difficult to lose an election. But win or lose, you will learn a lot about yourself, and just like a lot in general about the school, about the students here, about the issues that people care about when you engage in elections. And so I would really encourage you to consider running, or I guess if you're here, you're considering it already, I would encourage you to do it. And to echo Matt's point, if you have any questions or if I can be of any help in helping you navigate the process or understanding what your next step should be, I'll be at some of the other sessions, but I'm also happy to set up a meeting or just like answer any questions via email as well. So our emails are on the Western USC website, so you can send me an email at any point as well.
Thanks, Vic. I'm just going to put my email in the chat so that if you are having trouble finding someone or if you have questions, I can kind of be your point person if you need someone to help you get to the right place. So that's there now. Thank you so much for being here. It was great. I think we had a really good, I felt like it was a really good conversation. I hope it was useful for everyone. We have a session on, basically we have sessions Wednesday and Friday this week, and then Thursday and Friday next week. So we're looking on Wednesday at making sure that everyone who's interested in running understands a little bit more about how the USC works as an organization, because we have lots of different stuff going on. Friday, we'll be getting into a little bit more detail about how you develop a platform, so tips and tricks for that. Next Thursday, we're going to be looking more at policy, so kind of what kinds of decisions are made by council, what kind of decisions are made by the board, and where different policies live. And then finally on Friday, we'll be doing a deep dive on the elections rules themselves. So if you have questions, concerns, really want to make sure that you understand how to be successful in a USC election. So those are all coming up. And as Matt said, USC Insta is the place to find it. If you're struggling to find it though, email me. I'll get you set up with the links. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Wherever you are. It's actually a little bit sunny in London right now for the last little bit of the day, so that's nice. And I hope to see you all again at future sessions. Thanks so much.